Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, it's surprising since they went after ride shares, big time, ride shares and
We have.
They've been on spring break for like 3 weeks. They've been ready for a while.
all right, ready to go.
Yep. It's Andrew. Yep.
Okay, it's 6 p.m. on the 1st of April, the year 2025. This will commence the Buckley City Council study session. On your agenda, you have, if you would look down to item B, go down to subsection C, it says park impact fees. Please add the word fire department or fire in there, because that'll be talked about as well. So we have guests here tonight that I hear from the other side of the bridge, but they're going to give us, we're going to enjoy their FFA presentation. So please go ahead.
Really quick before we start, we just want to say thank you guys so much for having us. We are from Enumclaw FFA. So this is our agriculture issues presentation that we're working on before we go to state in May. So we're still on lines. We're working on getting off of them. We do have a fill-in today, but we just want to say thank you and we appreciate any questions, comments, concerns at the end.
So we're gonna go through and just say our names. I'm Juliet Critter and I'm like the city council member, like mediating the discussion.
I'm Liam Isbell. I play the role of Kent Brooks. My role is basically, I'm the farmer who's getting land bought out for development.
I'm Lucy Parker and I am the project manager.
I'm Lucy Kilcup and I'm filling in for the role of Nippet.
I'm Austin Martin and I play Lucas Walton. And I am a farmer who is neighboring the landowner whose land is being bought out.
So we'll get started. All right, folks, let's get started. I'm council member Lily Thompson, and I'll be mediating this discussion. We're here today to discuss the proposed housing development project on land currently owned by Mr. Kent Brooks, who is selling his farmland to the city for development. As you all know, there's a lot of disagreement around this topic, so let's try to keep things civil and hear everyone out. We've got representatives from the development team, the concerned neighbors, and of course, the landowner himself. So let's start with opening statements. Mr. Brooks, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. My family's been farming this land for over 75 years. It's been a good run, but times change and so do circumstances. I've come to an agreement with the city to sell my land for this development. I've weighed my options and I believe this project is a good move. The compensation is fair and it helps set my family up for the future. I also believe this area could benefit from more housing. This is an opportunity for growth. This project will bring new jobs, new homes, and it will help revitalize the community. I've made my decision and I think it's time for this city to grow.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Walton, you've been vocal in opposition to this project. Would you like to share any of your thoughts?
Hey, I'm not against Mr. Brooks personally. We've been neighbors for years and I respect him. But this development is gonna hurt my farm and it's gonna hurt the entire area. I've got crops, livestock, and land all around me. It's all part of what I do. If you put a housing development next to it, the noise, the traffic, the pollution, it's gonna destroy everything that I've worked for. My farm is not just a hobby, it's a livelihood. I don't wanna wake up every morning to construction trucks driving by or houses backed up to my fields. We are not ready for this kind of change. There has to be a better place to build these houses than right on top of established farms like mine.
I agree with Mr. Walton. I'm Ian Picnic and I live in the Summertop Farms housing development and I can tell you, People are already complaining about the congestions we've got. The roads are crowded, there's not enough space in the schools, and now they want to throw more houses into the mix? It'll ruin the entire landscape, change the view, and most importantly, the quality of life. Do you think we moved here for a big industrial mess? No, we wanted a peaceful suburban place to live, and this is turning out to be the exact opposite of that. I'm telling you, it's going to be a nightmare for everyone who lives here. I've already started a petition. There's no way I'm going to let this happen.
All right, Ms. Picnic, thank you for your perspective. Let's hear from Chloe Clearwater, the project manager and developer from Clearwater Construction. Chloe, could you tell us why you believe this development is a good fit for the area?
Thank you, council member. I understand the concerns here and they're valid. Change is always difficult, but let me explain why this development makes sense. The city has been growing and the demand for housing is increasing. We've already seen a rise in people move into the area and the Rainier Vista development is an excellent option. It's close to major roads, schools, and services, making it perfect for new homes. We're not just building houses, we're building a community, one that's designed to be sustainable and fit well within the existing infrastructure. We're going to mitigate any concerns with proper planning. This development is an investment in the future of the town, and I believe it'll bring great benefits to everyone, including residents like Ms. Picnic and Mr. Walton, even if it takes time to adjust.
Thank you, Ms. Clearwater. I think we've heard a lot of valid points from everyone here. We've got a clear divide between the people who see this as an opportunity for growth and people who see it as a way of life. Mr. Brooks, you've made your decision to sell, but Mr. Walton, I understand your concerns. Ms. Clearwater, can you speak more about the measures about taking address to concerns about traffic, noise, and the environmental impact?
Absolutely. We're committed to keeping this development as low impact as possible. We've done traffic studies to ensure the roads can handle the additional cars, and we're planning for traffic calming measures by adding a roundabout west and north of the new school, along with extra access roads coming in from all directions into the neighborhood. For noise, we'll be planting buffers of trees and shrubs between the residential areas and the farmlands to help block sound, specifically focusing on the south end of our development where it borders Mr. Walton's property. We're committed into building a way that preserves as much of the natural landscape as we can. We're not going in blind here. We put a lot of thought into making sure this development will integrate smoothly into the existing infrastructure.
Hey, I don't care about a few trees and some buffer zones. It's not just about the noise. It's about the lifestyle. You can't replace farms with houses and expect everybody to just get used to it. It'll change everything, the peace, the openness, the air quality. Once you build here, there's no going back. Then what? I'll lose my farm. What will I do then? Honestly, I'm getting the sense that Mr. Brooks is penny wise and pound foolish.
I noticed your concerns about traffic and disrupting peace, but could you give me more context for the council?
Well, I've done some research and learned a lot. Upsall University recently studied the relationship between suburban sprawl and traffic and congestion on American communities' roads. It proved that people moving to these rural and suburban developments tend to have jobs in more urban areas with fixed hours. This creates rush hours of extreme traffic that just doesn't fit what our town can hold. Your simple accommodations won't be able to fix this.
Okay, let's look at the facts. Over the last 25 years, Kane County has seen roughly a 30% increase in population. So traffic is just bound to happen. This is a minuscule issue because we as residents of Kane County have been adapting to and working around this issue of traffic and traffic jams as it has come. Plus, our roads are pretty quiet as they are. So one more housing development won't hurt anything.
If I may, Mr. Brooks, do you think that's our problem? The influx of people is too much for our community, which is so heavily relies on agriculture and small businesses. The truth is, we're not looking for advances. We're looking for a simpler, more rural life. I'd like to know a little bit more about the proposal for what our school district is about to do this. Our kids are our future, so how will this impact their daily routine?
This is one we've given a multitude of thought to throughout our planning. As you may know, our community school district is filling up quickly. We have come up with what we think is a great plan. Our development is expected to bring roughly 150 school-age kids with room to grow. We are accounting for this by building a new elementary school in the center of our development, as well as accounting for this in our budget by planning to buy and donate portables to the local middle and elementary schools.
I support our school district too. In fact, I have 3 kids who went through our school system. We are proud supporters of our schools. Whatever they decide to do is fine with me. I would be proud to have a new elementary school built on this land along with the housing development.
Well, guess what? I have kids in the school system too, but I'm tired of the constant increase in our tax dollars going towards things we don't even need. I'm happy to support our school district with any necessary changes they want to address, but this is not some minor change like building a portable or transferring students. This is a whole new part of our community. Our residents can't afford all these new levies.
We've now heard several opinions from both sides of the topics of traffic, population increase, and schooling. All right, now, let's switch gears and talk about the topic of pollution. Let's hear it first from Ms. Picnic, HOA president. What are your thoughts on this subject?
We have an ever-growing state. Due to the 2020 census, we are the 7th fastest growing state in the nation. This doesn't come without a cost. The NOAA just did a study that provides evidence linking non-source water pollution to suburban developments. This happens because of the multitude of concrete surfaces that run off stormwater. This stormwater carries mixes of oil, gasoline, and so many other pollutants and chemicals that end up in local waterways. I'm not saying that this development will be an enormous contributor. I'm just trying to show that this project will only negatively affect our town.
Ms. Picnic, if I'm not mistaken, you live in a house within a housing development, which not too long ago was a family farm just like mine. So before you keep going, I suggest you do a little research on how your neighborhood has impacted this town and its people.
Okay. Begin to think of this development as an add-on to yours. The proposed development is a 39.5 acre plot for a path which will be used for the new elementary school. This leaves 35 residential acres. This is in similar size to your 33 acre development. If pollution is your concern, I suggest you concern yourself with something else. The plotted out land can and will be permitted by King County and change from an A10 in meaning agriculture land with 1 dwelling per 10 acres to an A4 in meaning 4 dwellings every acre.
Thank you all for your time and thoughts on this difficult matter. We have clarity, but not an agreement. The county will look over the points brought to our attention, but I'm split. I see Mr. Brooks' side to develop this land. We need more housing for an uproar in population, and Ms. Clearwater proposes a really good solution. But at the same time, Mr. Walton's reasonable doubt is justified. The noise, the traffic, and pollution this may bring up is really concerning, as well as Ms. Picnic's thoughts on how our schools will handle this. I'm sure. Are there any closing thoughts for this discussion?
In every aspect, I feel that this proposal will bring this area to an all-time low that we can't afford. The burden that will put on our community, the effect that it will have on our school system and tax dollars, along with the population increase. The facts are there. We can't support a development like Rainier Vista when the council looks over the plans and consequences of the project. Please take into consideration the lives that could be harmed. This is a necessity. This is not a necessity, it's a choice, one that I would never buy into.
I'm a large member of our town's beef cattle production. As of the 2022 agricultural census, our county accounts for over $5 million in beef sales. My livelihood is so very important to me and my family, and to see it be so largely impacted by this new development is not gonna fly. I came in here today to make my points known that this has and will impact agriculture all around me. The water runoffs bring pollutants that will only hurt my animals. In our current world, farmers only take up 1% of the global population, and it's dying. I call for revival.
I hear and understand your points, Mr. Walton, but at some point, you're gonna realize too that small family farms like ours are going out of business and that you may not be able to last much longer. I also know there may be some hard feelings between us, but I hope that we can move past this and not hold a grudge. I was presented with the opportunity to sell for a good price that will help me and my family for years to come. The selling of this land has made it possible for us to pay off some of our larger debts and be able to move to a much smaller, more manageable piece of property that is more fitting for my family.
Like I said before, we put a lot of effort into this and thought many things out. Read the facts. We're doing this by the book and have good reasoning for everything. We have realized and reflected on how much this will impact farmers, members of the community, and everyone else. We understand that people have grown up here, raised families, and created a living for themselves. That is why we're working so hard on this project. The city is overfilled with people and sacrifices need to be made. Mr. Walton, this doesn't mean we'll take your land. Mr. Brooks took us up on the offer. That doesn't mean we're gonna destroy all local farming. We understand the importance and appreciate all the hard work that farmers do for our community. Together, we can make an impact that this city needs.
So you may ask, where do we go from here? I believe we need to continue the conversation, gather more data, and maybe conduct a few more public hearings to ensure everyone's voices are being heard and considered. This isn't something we can rush into, and we must be smart in ensuring that whatever decision is made serves the entire community and not just a couple of us individuals. In the coming weeks, we will review the findings of the studies on traffic, pollution, and the environmental impact that was brought up today. We will also look into the broader needs for housing and whether the development can be made without creating lasting harm on the character of our town. We will reconvene soon. Until then, I encourage everyone to keep the dialogue going and ask yourself, what do you think is the most important factor for the future of this community? Is it the preservation of our agricultural heritage, the need for more housing and growth, or finding a way to balance both in a way that minimizes the impact on everyone involved? Whatever your answer may be, we would be interested in hearing the thoughts on the matter. Thank you again to everyone who spoke today. This meeting is adjourned. Are there any questions or like anything that anybody would like to ask?
Any comments for these fine young people?
I have a quick question for Mr. Brooks. At the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that you had an agreement with the city. Can you clarify if you have an agreement with the city, county, or is it just with Clearwater Construction?
I kind of didn't really think that one through all the way. I kind of was going along the lines with, it's an agreement with the city and the city was hiring Clearwater Construction to do the development.
Okay,
If that's something that the city does.
not typically,
Okay.
but I think that if you're working, or if it's based in King County, are you thinking the city of Enumclaw? It's within city limits. So then it would probably be directly with the Clearwater Construction, and then you would probably be jointly petitioning the county and the city, depending on where it falls in city limits.
If a gentleman doesn't want the farmland closed down, what are you gonna do what is the city gonna do to mitigate neighbors that move in that wanna be next to a farm but don't like the smell of his farm?
Right,
My neighbor.
for sure. There's a lot of regulation that goes with bringing in a new development right around a lot of farmland. And so, that would definitely, a development would definitely like tense up the regulations on my land, which would help a bit with that. But yeah, there's always gonna be people complaining about cows barking, you know?
They do that.
Anything else?
I don't have a question. It was good and it's really real about what's going on in
Great job.
Enumclaw and same thing in Buckley. I mean, it's a real thing. So you guys did a really good job.
Okay. To Mr. Brook and Mr. Walton now, this is my second one I've seen of you guys. There. 100% better where people come into these community meetings, they're passionate. There, you guys are going to state, you're passionate about what you're trying to do. You're trying to sell, he's trying to save. My question is to the moderator here at the council meeting here. I don't know your name, but how can you give them any advice on how people come in here that they're so passionate that they're interrupting and you're hitting the gavel, I'm assuming?
So I'm Mayor Pro Tem Ron Smith.
Okay.
Running the meeting here. And so what the gentleman makes a good point about people being passionate, and our rule here at the Buckley City Council is a 3-minute time frame with somebody speaking. Normally when we're set up, there'll be a podium over here where we have public comment and people come up and they speak to an issue, and the 3-minute timer goes off. If they're in mid thought, we're kind of loose with that. But if they don't want to stop, then the mayor or myself, if he's not here, will gavel them down with the 3-minute thing. But you got to let people speak. They are passionate. You hit the nail on the head, sir.
Ones I've been to, everybody's passionate. Mr. Brook and Mr. Walton, 100% better. You guys gotta talk to each other a little bit. It's good could fight it a little bit more, depending on what they're doing. The gavel for Juliet could hit the gavel a little bit and say, hey, this is still a good civilized meeting. We're not, that's what I'm saying there. Could interrupt them and say, hey, Mr. Brooke, Mr. Walton, sit down. There, it's his turn to speak now.
Exactly. Everybody has a turn to speak and we need to be civil and passion. The gentleman, again, he brings it up. Everybody's passionate. In your skit that you did, and you did a very good job. I'm very impressed with you young people. I am father of my last one's a teenager as well. This is very good. Very, this council has seen the Buckley FFA come in here as well and do the same argumentative approach that you're doing, because they were going to state at the same time. So you guys are doing a good job. The things that you say about regulation and about environment and about this stuff, take it to heart, learn about it. I don't know if any of you kids, well, I imagine you live on farms or you're an agricultural family, because why would you be an FFA? But that's outstanding. Just keep on doing what you believe in, and good luck when you go to state. Anything else from council? Thank you very much, folks. Moving on, we're going to item B under D, under small b. Under B, review of the Buckley Downtown Association art application. We have Director Snodgrass here, and there's a staff report.
Good evening, and I have to say good job to Lucy over there, just so her mom knows that I said it. Before you today, council, is our first public art application for your review. We do not plan to make it kind of like the normal process to always come to a study session with these. But for this first one, and as we get used to the process and the policy, we wanted to bring it forth to you guys. The commission has been working on developing, as you guys know, the policy for public art, both on public land and on privately owned land. The application brought to us today is for a privately owned land, and the art application is from a partnership between BDA and the business owner. All the details are out there, and happy to answer any questions. Look at the policy. This will be coming, if you guys are comfortable, to a vote for next council meeting as recommended by the commission.
And this was the one that I mentioned last week that we looked at. And Brad Kalin came before us kind of explaining it was going to be coming. So the commission looked at it. There were a few tweaks we wanted to kind of make to our application. And so they were listening. So I think they took it back and kind of added more and clarified a little bit more. And so then they re-looked at it and now it's before us. So I just wanted to throw that in.
I will say that one thing that I read most of it and I have to get in the weeds on this, but I would like to see that any policy goes into place, limits the art to historical relevance to Buckley and not cultural stuff. I don't want to see anybody having any type of political sign on the side of their building. And we're talking about businesses in Buckley. Historical things that, like the example here for that building, 691, I think it is. When I was a kid, that was a dry cleaners. Obviously it was something else way before when it went into, I think that's spot on. There are businesses along Main Street that won't be able to, well, they could do it on the fronting Main Street or on the backside of their buildings facing the north or the south. But I wouldn't want to see somebody put something that's offensive to part of the community on the side of their building. I mean, historical, relevant things to our history here is what I would like to see. So we're not having, I mean, I can't imagine that anything that would be offensive would be approved, but I think it needs to be spelled out because you know how people push.
Mhm.
Well, it's in the notes.
yeah.
I see it in on the meeting notes. It says for like historical society responsibilities, help to obtain historical images that coincide with the buildings of proposed art.
Mhm.
Will the council vote on all these
The
that come through?
It does come through. For public art, for the policy, public art policy, page 1, second paragraph, we end it with a sentence that says, placed in city-owned property to be tasteful, non-controversial, and non-offensive. And the qualifiers, are on page 2 of the application. Defines city boundaries or entryways, creates a sense of community, identity, and character, reflects history, heritage, or culture, provides interactive opportunities for the public, enhances economic development, or promotes civic engagement, or evokes a sense of fun. So those are the elements that the commission is looking for and that we will be looking for, or that the council will be looking for, before you make any approval. I will say that art or public art, depending on the type of public art, does loosely fit into the sign code. We kept it out of our sign code in an effort to have public policy pertaining to it, but it is a very sensitive area in terms of First Amendment rights. And so this policy, I think, covers our bases, and I hope that we don't come to a point where we're looking to deny a public art application based off of what we've outlined as we would approve, but we will cross that bridge with the city attorney should we come to it, of needing to deny something because it is considered offensive.
Wouldn't, I mean, the Citizens Advisory Group is going to be looking at them first.
Mhm.
And so they know the policy as
Yeah.
well, so they can deny it
Yes.
based on what the policy is.
Mhm.
So we may never see if they deny
Correct.
it, then we would
Mhm.
never see it,
Correct.
correct?
Makes sense.
Mhm.
I think it looks good.
Yeah, an appeal would, so if somebody was to deny, and then they would be able to file a land use petition act, which of course council would be made aware of.
I like it.
Yeah,
I
I'm
kinda
excited.
thought that it was gonna be on the other side of the building, because I was thinking, I remember hearing him say something about seeing it from 410 or
Yes.
something.
Oh,
But
yeah.
Yep.
No, you're right.
but,
I believe that this was the first of a planned series.
okay.
So, yeah, the hope is that.
So there may be
several.
something.
Yeah,
something
they're
else on
looking
the other
for
side.
images, that are, yeah, in alignment with each of the different buildings,
Okay.
like this one specifically.
Okay. Yeah, I figured it would come later
Mhm.
if it wasn't this one, so.
Is there any further questions before moving it on to next week?
Not really.
I said it.
Is there anybody online?
That's good.
No.
I think it's kind of fun to see the history of it, you
Yeah.
know, and I think a lot of people in town will enjoy that as well.
And it's been great to test our procedure with something as welcoming as this, to just make sure and kind of squeeze out the problems in the application process. So it's worked really well.
Well, you're gonna learn as you go. It's not gonna be perfect the first couple. for
Mhm.
sure.
Correct.
I would love to see signage on the old Madden's Grocery and the old D. John's and Kay's Department Store and all of those things that used to be here.
Now,
You know.
I did see in the maintenance of it, if something should happen to it, would that be like graffiti or anything? I mean, the owners are
The
going to
business
be the
owners,
ones
yeah.
to have to repair it?
Correct.
Okay,
If it was in a park and we were doing a feature, then it would be
then
on
it would be us.
public property, but
Okay.
private property stays the owner's responsibility.
So it's not like gifted to us. Okay.
Anything else from council?
No, I like it.
I like it, yeah.
Thank you, Director Snodgrass.
Thank you.
We're moving on to small C under big B, park and fire impact fees.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. We are joined tonight virtually by Annie again to review the park impact fees, and she will also be introducing the fire impact fees that we discussed 2 study sessions ago.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks, council, for having me again. I'm going to share my screen. This is the presentation that should have gone out in your council packet. I do want to say I got some feedback from Courtney Brunel to add a slide about comparison of both your current and your proposed impact fees to some of your peer and neighboring cities. And so I have included that. That's a new slide, and we can make sure that that goes out to you all, so you have that in your packet after this meeting. So hopefully you can see my slide deck here. I'm just gonna hit present and we'll just go through the slide presentation. There's a few things here. One thing I want to note is that because I met with you all in February, there's a few things in this presentation that I've retained as previous slides that provide context that I'm going to go through very quickly tonight. So they're in your presentation deck so that you have access to that information, and so that if there's questions, we can refer to the specific factual information. I don't expect you to remember every detail about the presentation from February, but we are going to go through those contexts and about the impact fee slides very quickly. If there's anything you have a question about, please stop me and we can go through them in more detail. But those are the kind of the first two items in the agenda here. Then we're going to review the Parks Impact Fee update approach, how that's changed based on our previous conversation in February, and then the proposed fee, the updated proposed fee, which is different from what the fee that was proposed in February. A thing to note here is that, these fees are based on all of the inputs that we discussed. So there's lots of flexibility if you find that they're still maybe too high or if they're different than you expected them to be. And we can, even talk about some of those changes on the fly tonight. After Parks Impact Fee, we're going to talk about the Fire Impact Fee approach and proposed fee. As I'm sure you know, City of Buckley does not currently levy a fire impact fee. This would be a new fee for the city. It is with precedent for communities of your size, especially those communities that are still delivering fire protection services as a municipal service. So many cities are receiving that by contract or are served by a regional fire authority or another entity that is not the city government. And so it is different for those cities, but for particularly cities that are delivering municipal fire, it's very with precedent to deliver, to have a fire impact fee. So we can discuss that approach and the proposed fee, very similar to the Parks Impact Fee. And then there's some considerations, and like I said, some comparison to not only your previous fee and the impacts that, the tax burden impact to potential developers, but then also your comparison to some of your peers and your neighbors. So like I said, I'm going to go through context and approach pretty quickly. This is all material that was in the previous slide deck. There's a few updates to make sure that, any place where we want to discuss the fire impact fee, that information has been provided. But essentially, prior to 2024, your impact fees were last updated in 2016. Those fees were not indexed to inflation. They were only established for residential development, although, we can all agree that commercial uses create parks and fire impacts as well. And state law has changed. So state law now requires fees to be variable based on the square footage, the number of bedrooms or trips generated by that development. So where previously many communities had one parks impact fee for single family residences and maybe one for multifamily residences, we now have to have those in a variable format that aligns to the size of that structure being built. And so that can be square footage, it can be number of bedrooms. We've discussed square footage in detail. Framework, who I am working with, I am a private public policy consultant, but work with Framework a lot, work with you to update your Parks, Recreation, and Trails plan, which is really important to updating your impact fee because it includes all of your capital projects lists. That is then what we're trying to pay for with that impact fee. And then, lastly, City of Buckley does not currently levy a fire impact fee, so this would be a new fee. Just to go through this briefly, impact fees are one-time charges. They can be levied for a number of things, fire and parks facilities among them. The revenues must support system improvements. So those are things that are in your capital facilities plan that are reasonably related to the new development. Often the term for that is a nexus to the new development or the growth that will be served by those projects. The statute, I've included the statute here, particularly because it has changed. As we discussed last time, it is here for your reference. I'm not going to read it. And then our impact fee rate study approach is to establish fees for both residential and commercial development. We want to make sure those fees are compliant with state law and have a rate structure that is variable by square footage. I prefer and really suggest a really simple, easy to use impact fee rate formula, something that can be updated by the city on its own, something that you don't require a consultant to support, so that you can make timely changes as needed. Also, really support fees that can be easily indexed to inflation. What we don't like to see is fees that stay static while your construction costs of all of your capital projects are going up. What we want to see are fees that kind of match pace with the growth in cost. And then lastly, we of course want to consider the fee burden for developers and ensure the fees make sense, especially when we compare to your neighbors and who we might think of as competitors. So what we don't want to do is create fees that are so high that development does not occur in your community. We want to make sure those fees make sense, but that at the same time, we're collecting enough revenue from those fee sources to fund the capital investments that are needed to support that development. So it's really a delicate balance there. This is the impact fee rate study formula. We look at what's called proportionate share, which is kind of the city's share of funding growth-related capital investments versus development share of growth-related capital investments. The way we've done that is we look at the cost of all of our impact fee eligible projects and subtracted the available tax funding for system improvements. That in some ways can be a guess. It certainly is something that is an assumption here in the model for both your parks and fire impact fees. We're looking based on historical tax funding, what we think may be available in the future, and also what we think it's reasonable for the city to bear versus developers. What I will say is that there is the statute requires a proportionate share, but there's no precedent or law setting that says that proportionate share must be a certain amount. I think, you could probably make an argument that the statute would allow your proportionate share to be $1 and growth to pay for everything else. But I think, we want to be really sensitive to the intent of the law, which is that, the city should bear some burden for infrastructure that's needed to support growth, just like it has historically, but also that development should be paying the lion's share of those costs. That's all divided over the growth that we expect. Usually we think about that in terms of kind of the per capita growth, so how much the population is going to increase. When we're looking at both commercial and residential factors, we want to look at a modified per capita that considers not only residents, but also kind of commercial beneficiaries, so employees or businesses. And that's how we get our impact fees. And what I'll say is that this formula is the same for both parks and fire. There are some changes into how it's applied, particularly, what does modified per capita look like? And we will go through those things in great detail as part of this presentation. So just again, this slide is for reference. You saw this in February, but this is our population growth expectation. This is directly from your comprehensive plan. By 2044, the population is expected to increase by over 3,000 residents, and employment's expected to increase by over 1,000 jobs. So in the first 10 years of that period, we're expecting an increase of about 1,000 residents and about 440 jobs. So that is the growth that we're trying to accommodate with these impact fees. And basically, like, those are the investments to serve that amount of growth, that 10 years of growth is what we're looking to fund with these impact fees. So we're going to go over Parks impact fee first, I think, primarily because you've seen this before, and I want to discuss some of the things we talked about at the February meeting. And then what you'll see is the fire impact fee is very similar. And so some of the changes that were made in the Parks impact fee approach flow into the fire impact fee approach. So this is from February. This has not changed. This is how we, for the purposes of the Parks impact fee, have related population and employment. So this is a very standard approach that's taken by many communities in Washington. Essentially, we're saying, your residents have more access and more usage of parks than than employees that may be working in in Buckley. And so you have to kind of think about their access and how do you compare that. To do this, what we did is we compared the hours per day that the parks are available to employees versus residents. So they're in your community 9 hours a day, if they have an 8 to 5 job, and 5 days a week. And so that's a little bit less access than residents whose access is based on the hours that parks are opened. Your parks are open, quite long hours, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so when we compare, 45 hours of access to 112 hours of access, we get a resident to employee conversion factor of 40.2%. Again, this is consistent with the approach a lot of communities use. It's been updated based on City of Buckley's parks hours, and that's really the only difference. This is also a slide from February, just a reminder, when we looked at proportionate share, we looked at historically what the city has funded, and we found that about 29% of your overall, parks capital projects have been funded by city revenue versus impact fees. So that was like kind of the high band for proportionate share. However, one thing we noted is that the city doesn't dedicate those revenues to parks capital projects. Historically, those revenues have been made available through appropriations or transfers in from the general fund. So even if we assume that grant revenue will continue to come in and that will be available for parks capital projects, we do expect that the city will need some of those appropriations and transfers in. And we don't think that the future is necessarily a good indicator of the availability of those funds in the future. So, you've had 29% available in the past. That has been very difficult. You have a lot of other costs that are, on your plate as a community. Expenses are going up. Revenues are not keeping pace. And so, although historically you've had 29%, we want to be a little bit more conservative and say that we think in the future you may have 20% of the funds available as your proportionate share to fund parks capital projects. So the other thing we had to do, this is from February, this is only changed in a few ways, and this slide itself has not changed, but we have to look at what are the capital projects that we're trying to fund. What is growth eligible? What we identified is that the city needs to develop several acres of new parks to address your level of service needs. That's in addition to the acreage needed to meet existing needs. So what we have to do is identify which are the projects that are going to meet existing level of service needs. So those are called your existing deficiencies. That's, it sounds pejorative. It's basically just a terminology that the legislature uses. But all it means is that if you already have some needs to serve your current population, you can't fund those needs with impact fees. So what we said is you have some projects on the docket to address those kind of current existing deficiencies. There's also new acreage needed to address growth. That's what's listed here, the 11 acres of community parks, 9 acres of neighborhood parks, and 3 acres of natural areas. Those are the projects that we want to identify as impact fee eligible projects that will be funded by growth. And that's what we did here. This list has changed slightly from the previous meeting. There are a couple things that came up. One is that the Miller Park project costs are different and the phasing is different than it was expected to be. And also that there has been money that has been reserved for Miller Park. So I understand that there was money that you were hoping to get from the state legislature. That's not going to happen. So, one time this amount on my slide was like $540,000. It's now $270,000. Those are the dollars that we understand are, committed and available to this project from city revenue. The city then, based on that, anticipates a project list of about $4 million. So again, this list has changed. If you compared it to the February deck, you would find some small changes, again, primarily based on Miller Park. I did also alphabetize this list. So it was originally in the order that's in the, that is in the Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails plan. Instead, for the purposes of our meeting, I alphabetized it. I just felt like during the meeting last time, it was hard to find the right projects to be able to speak to what those costs were. So if you are to do a one-to-one comparison, you would see that these overall project list costs has gone down. That is why. So the unfunded growth-related project costs, so out of that $4 million are about $3.8 million. And then what we did is compare what would it look like if we amortize those costs? So we said we're going to pay for those costs over 10 years versus 20 years. And then we looked at both the kind of high end of proportionate share. So that historical, you funded 29% of growth-related parks capital projects via kind of city general funds, non-impact fee dollars, essentially, versus what we think is reasonable, which is about for planning for the future, which is about 20%. And what you can see is that when we amortize that, over 20 years, we get a much more reasonable impact fee. And, even with that proportionate share where the city is contributing 20%, it's still very reasonable. This number right here, so this $2,563.68 essentially became our base rate for setting the impact fee for a 2,500 square foot house. What we assume is looking at your kind of permit data from the last, I think, 6 years. what we find is that a lot of the single family homes that have been built have been right in that range of like 2,200 to 2,700. There are certainly outliers, and there's definitely a subset of houses that are closer to that 2,000. But without empirically analyzing the list, what I can say is that, that's sort of what we think is kind of the baseline, or like the expectation that residents or developers will have when thinking about the impact fee, is like, what would it cost to build kind of your standard home, which is about 2,500 square feet. So implementing that as our base, what we were able to do is set residential size bands based on that base rate of approximately $1.02 per square foot. So again, taking that 2563, dividing it by 2,500, you get about $1.02 per square foot. And then we set size bands. The feedback that I received after the February meeting was that, having size bands that were approximately every 500 square feet would be really useful. One of the things I want to note here is I think there may be a natural expectation to set the square footage at like 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Very intentionally did not do that here. The reason for that is that I expect that many of the permits that you'll receive, just based on historical permit data, will be right around that $2,500 mark. And I think you're going to get a lot of feedback if you are getting a permit for 24 50 square foot house and 25 50 square foot house, and they're in totally different size bands. It felt much easier, from a implementation perspective, to kind of split the difference and say, let's not hit our, where we expect a lot of those fees to be. Let's actually have bounds on that, so that, those houses that are right around that same range will bear the same impact fee rate. So that's why the size band is, at 1,250 versus at 1,000 square feet. This is all completely flexible. So if you decided that you want, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 versus 1,250, 1,750, 2,250, 2,750, we can do that. The other thing I want to say is that the legislature does not require, how far down you go in terms of square footage, or how high you go in terms of square footage. So you could say, hey, the maximum rate we're going to charge is the rate on the 3,250 square foot unit. And, if you're building a 4,000 square foot house, you'd pay that same rate as that 3,250 square foot unit. That is totally up to you. What I strove to do in providing this table was to provide as much detail as possible, so you could tell me how you would want to condense those fees. The thing I will note on this is that because we use a base rate, the fee is kind of normalized across the housing sizes. And so if you were to have to condense this list, and let's say you're going to have $3,328 be your max rate, so that's the rate for a 3,250 square foot house. My guess, without knowing exactly what permits you're going to receive in the future, we can't predict that. My guess is that you are not going to collect enough dollars to fully pay for your capital projects list. So unfortunately, there is a kind of externality that if you condense this fee, you don't charge a higher fee for those larger homes, that you probably won't collect enough impact fees over the next 10 years to fully fund that project list. I think that's, very possible either way. The problem with impact fees is that development is very volatile. It's based on, the economy. When times are tough, a lot of development doesn't occur. When times are good, more development occurs. And so even if you weren't to condense this fee table, it's possible that you wouldn't fully fund these capital projects. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a expectation that you may not be able to complete that project list, or the city may have to provide more non-impact fee funds in order to complete the project list. So one other thing I want to note here is that there is a law in RCW in Washington, the ADU or DADU, so attached additional dwelling units or detached additional dwelling units. Those impact fees must be 50% or less than the impact fee that would be charged on a primary improvement. So if the square footage of the ADU is somehow greater than or equal to the primary improvement, you might have to cap that fee. I honestly have not seen that play out in any community, but I just always want to make sure that we provide that language so that your community development department, whoever is levying these fees kind of understands the potential impacts and can work with that. So that's a note there. I'm going to move us to fire impact fee rate study, although I am happy to stop if we would prefer to take a break and discuss any of this first. So I'm definitely at your preference there. But otherwise, I will get into the fire impact fee rate study. Like I said, the approach to the fire impact fee is intentionally very similar to the approach to the parks impact fee rate study. The reason for that is that, there's a reason that we did the park impact fee rate study the way we did. We want it to be simple, we want it to be transparent, easy to understand, and we want, justifiable methodology. And so those things, extend to the fire impact fee. I will say, if you're looking at something like transportation, oftentimes that fee structure can be different because you're looking at transportation demand models and it's just much more complicated in some ways. But for parks and fire, it's very common to use the same rate study approach for setting both types of fees. But there are some differences here that we'll get into. So just to provide some context here and talk about proportionate share a little bit, you do not currently levy a fire impact fee as a community. So your capital projects have historically all been funded by other revenues. However, some of that was done by the voters. So your recent 2011, I'm going to say recent, but maybe not super recent, fire station build was funded by a $5 million voted capital bond. You also do reserve money for fire apparatus and equipment. And, there's a beginning fund balance out of almost a little over $500,000. However, there isn't like clear dedicated funding for fire apparatus and equipment. Again, you've been making policy choices to reserve those funds for that via appropriations and transfers in. And so it is difficult to say exactly how many dollars may be available in the future. For our purposes, I just went ahead and said, let's consider that 20% as the city's potential proportionate share. I think that's very justifiable, and it matches what we did in the parks impact fee. But again, this is an assumption we're making, so it's another place where we can adjust our analysis if desired. We also looked at current call volume to kind of assess like what are the growth the implications of future growth. So we have to look at historical first. That allows us to project forward our expectations about the future. This matches closely what was done in the comprehensive plan. So this isn't new analysis. This is just slightly more updated and detailed for the most recent historical period. What you can see is that between 2016 and 2024, the department responded to an average of approximately 1,400 calls a year. That's approximately 190 calls per 1,000 population and employment. So when we look at population and employees is like the same. So one employee is equal to one person. If we assume the fire incident call rate will stay the same, so that 190 per 1,000 will stay the same, then we expect a growth in calls, right? Because population is going to go up. So that rate times the population will mean that we are expecting to experience more calls. We expect an additional about 400 calls per year. So by 2034. So that'd be about 1,900 calls per year. And then we can say that growth will be responsible for about 20% of those calls because growth is about 20% of the expected population employment by 2034. So then we need to look at what are the capital projects needs based on that growth. So, what do we expect to need? You do not have formal level of standard goals like documented. However, you do informally, and this is like directly from your comprehensive plan, base your level of service goals on recommended industry guidelines and standards around personnel and response time. So those are what we seek to maintain. We need to have enough facilities and enough apparatus and equipment to maintain the sufficient personnel to continue to achieve a response rate of 9 or fewer minutes 90% of the time. We don't expect that to require a new fire station. So right now, you have a fire station that is adequate, up through 2044. We don't expect that you'll need another facility to address growth. However, we do expect that there will be apparatus and equipment needs. What we did first was we looked at what are the existing apparatus and equipment needs. Again, the thing to remember here is that these apparatus and equipment are existing resources that are needed today. And so the replacement cannot be funded by impact fees. But it's useful to look at this because what you can identify is that you are adding one vehicle as part of this replacement schedule. So, the 2005 ambulance is becoming a reserve ambulance and you're essentially adding an additional ambulance. However, we do expect to address the increased call volume that you'll need some additional staffing and that staffing will have, commensurate equipment and apparatus needs. So if you have additional people, you're going to need more vehicles to allow them to do that work. You're also going to need additional equipment like SCBA, which is like the breathing apparatus that firemen use. So we expect that this increased staffing will require an increase in apparatus and equipment, including a fire engine, ambulance, and utility vehicle, and additional SCBA, which is that self-contained breathing apparatus. We estimated based on the costs that were estimated for your capital projects list, your equipment schedule, that the total cost of those investments will be $860,000 in 2025 dollars. And if you assume the city's proportionate share is 20%, then $688,000 of that is impact fee eligible equipment and apparatus that can be funded by fire impact fees. So again, we used our residential size bands. They were set based on that base rate of 58 cents per square foot. This base rate is different, of course, than parks. It's because your capital projects list that you're trying to fund is substantially smaller than the cost of the capital projects list in the parks impact fee. So if you'll remember in that case, that was almost $4 million. In this case, we're talking about 680, I believe, $1,000. So substantially less. The other thing is that we're more equally spreading these costs across population and employment. I will say that, you could make an argument that we shouldn't treat population employment as one-to-one because, again, those employees are only in your city for a certain amount of time. However, the kind of standard around communities is to treat an employee as having the same fire impact as a resident because the expected impact of a lot of employment is much higher. So, we expect if you have a senior living facility, for example, that the incident or the call rate for a senior living facility is going to be much higher than just your average residential home. That's not always the case, right? Certainly you might have a residential home where, when you're normalizing for the number of people living there, right? So you can't say it's the same number, but the same call rate. If you have a single family home that has people with complex medical needs or elderly people, that rate might be the same as a senior home. But for your average resident, we would expect that there are commercial uses that are going to have a much higher call rate. Another example, senior family home is like a great example, but another great example would just be, a bar, for example. There tends to be more incidents, more calls for medical events. Restaurants similarly can often have calls from a resident for more fire and emergency calls than a single family residential home. So what you'll see here is that the fee distribution is a little different for fire than it is for parks. We see that the commercial and industrial rate is higher than we saw for parks. However, the overall fee is lower, particularly for residential. So again, we set this based on the base rate for a 2,500 square foot house. We looked at that range of square footage from 750 to greater than 3,750 square feet and set that. Like in the case of the parks impact fee, this table can be adjusted. I would tell you honestly that my suggestion would be to make sure that you're using the same size bands for both your parks and your fire impact fee. I think that's one area where I would say don't be overly flexible. We don't want to have a very condensed set of fees for parks and then a less condensed set of fees for fire. It makes sense to have those size bands be the same for both fees. It's going to be much clearer for your community development folks, your potential developers, and just in general. It's more justifiable. And then similarly, we've got that same law in effect where ADU impact fee must be 50% or less than the impact fee charged on a primary improvement. So there's a few considerations we want to talk about. This you'll remember from February that the Buckley Municipal Code does establish that these impact fees can be reviewed annually to consider adjustments to index them to inflation, essentially to account for the increase in project costs. I would recommend implementing that, I would also recommend doing it for the fire impact fee. So we want to give you a fee structure that you're able to update on an annual basis or as necessary, that allows you to increase fees as project costs go up. And then I wanted to look at, how do these fees compare to what you're currently levying? So what I did look at is just sort of compare to your total kind of development and impact fees. This is a form that's directly off your website. This has been updated in 2024. And what you can see is that currently the kind of development fees, including impact fees, but also including your water hookup and sewer hookup and storm drain, are about $35,000, a little less than $35,000 for a single family residence. As of today, those parks impact fees are less than 5% of that cost. So parks impact fees are just a drop in the bucket of your overall development fees. If we were to implement the parks and fire impact fees that are in this presentation, the total impact fee development cost for a 2,250 square foot house would be $36,284.06. So it'd go up by, about $2,000, be about $2,000 more, making the park and fire impact fees about 10% of the overall development cost. So, proportionally it would go up substantially, but the true additional cost when you're building a, fairly standard single family residential home is not substantial. It's about $2,000, which not a huge increase in the grand scheme of things. I think something that will help sort of put that in context is looking at some of your neighbors and your peers. One of the things to note here is that it is really difficult to compare these fees across jurisdictions right now. The fee structures vary significantly. Not all communities are in compliance with the RCW that goes into effect around variability by square foot or number of bedrooms. And there's just been a very big difference in when some of these fees are updated. So what I've attempted to do here is to provide a comparison of both the parks and fire impact fees for kind of a 2,500 square foot house, kind of a standard new build, for several of your neighbor and peer communities. So we've got Black Diamond, Bonnie Lake, Edgewood, Enumclaw, Ording, Puyallup, and Sumner. And then I have provided several notes here about why fees might be different or if there's any other things to consider. So for example, the Puyallup does not levy a true fire impact fee, but they do levy fire construction permits. Those are related to the fire alarm and detection systems and other equipment like sprinkler systems. They're much smaller than an impact fee. I think the highest fee is somewhere around $900. And that's for like the largest potential system. Another note here is that for Black Diamond, if you have a fire sprinkler system in the new build that you're building, then you pay a reduced fire impact fee. And then one other note here is in Sumner, their updated parks impact fee is based on the number of bedrooms. So I wasn't able to pick 2,500 square foot home, but instead I conservatively selected their fee for a 2 to 3 bedroom single family residence. They also have a fee for a 4 to 5 bedroom single family residence that's substantially higher than this. It's like $5,500, I believe. So what you can see is that Buckley's proposed impact fees are much lower than some of your peers, but they are higher, particularly with your neighbors. And a note here is that Enumclaw did update their rate schedule, but these fees are not in compliance yet with, so anything in italics is not in compliance with the variability around housing structure size. So just what you can see is many of these fees, Bonnie Lake, Edgewood, Enumclaw, Ording, are flat rate. So Enumclaw has not quite, they've updated their fee schedule, but they haven't fully updated their impact fees at this point. And I don't unfortunately have more detail on that. So this does provide some useful comparison. I certainly, there is a lot of flexibility to address these fees in any direction you want to go. I think more so to reduce the fee than to increase the fee. I think if you think they're too low, certainly we would want to include additional projects on that project list. There's not a way to like artificially increase the fee. But if you are looking at these fees and you're like, man, we'd like to see the fees be lower, I think the thing to consider is the city prepared to either reduce the project list or to provide additional non-impact fee dollars to fund those projects? Because certainly, we can say, hey, your proportionate share will be higher and so this fee will go down. But that's really a policy decision that has, a major impact on overall city finances as well. So that's my presentation. I will pause here and happy to answer any questions or discuss.
Council have any questions of our presenter?
Not for her.
Yeah.
Thank you, Annie. On that last slide, can you make it a little larger?
Yes, I can zoom in here. How's that?
Better, thank you.
Given that new view, any questions?
Well, when you compare our population size, comparing us to Phillip or Sumner is not really a fair comparison. When you compare to like Enumclaw or Ording, we're doubling our fees. Am I reading it right? We're over doubling our fee for compared to our same size cities.
Is it Annie?
Annie.
Nobody has questions for her. We're gonna let her go and then we can get into our own conversation. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Around the room, thoughts on what we just heard about park impact fees and the new concept of fire impact fees. I have my own opinion, but I'm gonna save that till everybody's gone around.
I'll go first, I guess.
Go ahead.
Well, I know I'm gonna be the unpopular person in the room, but I don't really agree with the fees on the businesses. Buckley, it seems like the council for years is, prior to us, they've taken and almost treated let's say, they've treated like the businesses like second, never put them first. And so finally, when Dave reduced they got them to reduce the impact fees so we could attract these. We treat the businesses more like a burden versus an asset, and we should be treating them like an asset. Where we reduce some fees, get them in. Buckley's not a super attractive town when you speak of for business, when you look at the small size lots we have. So I think all the work that we did as a council and then turn around and we're gonna add a, park impact fee, a fire fee, and all of a sudden, and we need the economic development, and we haven't really had conversation about how we're gonna bring more economic development to the city. So I just think it's not a great choice to be taxing the businesses even more. And then you got legislation coming out with the highest tax increases that, Washington state history. It's not gonna be very good for us, I don't think. I don't think it's a very good long-term move. And then with the fire impact fees, I think we have a huge issue with the fire department that we're not gonna be able to, we already can't afford it. We're talking about not pausing hiring on the fourth thing, and I think the council's got a huge topic, and I think we should be looking forward to how we're gonna fund our fire department first. And then bringing in, we need to make a roadmap of what we're gonna do with the fire department and then start implementing stuff versus just randomly grabbing straws. But I could be wrong too. I'm open to suggestions, but.
Others? Councilmember Burson.
I agree as far as not charging the businesses the impact fees. Basically, she's putting down that everybody that works for the business is there for 9 hours, but everybody that works for the business is typically working. So, maybe they're taking their lunch break to go over to our park, but, they're not necessarily spending their day at our park. But we do want to attract business. And so I agree with Kenny that, charging the impact fees to the businesses is a little bit harsh considering we've been trying to draw business. And according to the growth plan, we need to have another 1,080 businesses or something?
1,800 jobs, and that was before the potential closure of Rainier State School.
Yeah. So I agree there. What was the other point, though, as far as the fire impact fee for residential? We're still going to need the equipment and, upgrades. I know it's not to replace some things, it has to be new things, but the things get used, so, we get more firefighters, we need more of those masks and all their apparatus that they use. So I think we need that, for the residential, but not necessarily for the business.
Councilmember Burbank or Anderson?
I agree with
feel like-
what.
Yeah, I feel like that was a lot to take in right now. But I mean, I agree with what you guys are saying. Remind me, why didn't Bonnie Lake, Ording, Sumner have a fire impact fee? Is it because they use
They're-
outside agencies?
Yeah, special
Okay.
purpose district.
But we may end up you don't know, we may end up being it within 2 years if we can't afford it. I mean, if used to say
Yeah.
Rainier State School goes out, there's what, 100 grand?
111.
111,000 out of our fire, we're already in it, gonna be potentially, we're coming in. No economics, right? There's no housing really selling right now, we don't know, but we could be. Trying to outsource our fire department, and I'm not saying that's where I wanna go, I'm just saying that's the reality that we're not talking about. That shouldn't be a study session about, talking about.
We can bring that forward in May.
So my thoughts are echoed by two other of my colleagues. We want to draw businesses here. We've been doing a darn good job. This is in my 8th year on council. There are a heck of a lot more full buildings on Main Street that there were then. We're losing one at the old 790. That beautiful store's going away and hopefully somebody comes in, but how do we, when somebody's looking to start a business and the economy of this country is run on small business. It's not the Amazons and the Costcos of the world. It is small business down main streets and side streets of every town and village and city and unincorporated place in this nation. Somebody like any one of us wants to start a business. We're a dreamer. We have an idea. We're scraping up our money and we want to go and start something. How do we do that if we have all these fees? I don't think we have businesses in town, and I'll think of the ones that I patronize the most: Blue Max, couple restaurants, whatever. People work all day. I don't see them going to hang out at the park and roll out their blanket and, maybe on the weekend, if they live in town, they might go to our park, but why are we gonna charge a business a park impact fee when none of our businesses, the only businesses we have that are near a park would be our heritage park, would be the feed store, and how does that really impact it's been there, that building's been there forever before that trail was ever there. We're gonna lose both the budgets that were passed at the state legislature that is yet to be signed by the governor. We're gonna close the Rainier State School, and we're gonna lose all those people. So we have to bring businesses in here if we need to meet that target. And again, by 2044, that was an arbitrary date set by, we have to conform with the Growth Management Act, and we have to file that comp plan and all that stuff. But even if that was to happen, if we have all these high impact fees for businesses, why would they come here and not go to one of these that doesn't have it? We've added full-time firefighters. This place was always a volunteer department. You had a chief. I think during my time on council, we had Assistant Chief Olson. And then there was a SAFER grant that we got for a retention coordinator And in the past couple of years, we've hired 3 full-time firefighters already. We've already funded that. I have no problem with, I know whatever I paid for my home when I moved back here. The developer used to be the mayor of this town. He paid impact fees and that was passed on to the buyer as part of the price. I get that. Any developer is not gonna eat an impact fee. They're gonna pass it on. If somebody wants to live in their property, they're gonna pay it. I have no problem with that. What's the other thing I circled here? Okay, yeah, I touched on that, about the parks. So my thing, and I don't know why we're going down the road of fire impact fees when we've been funding the fire department from all the types of different places. And I get that we're gonna lose $111,000 from the contract with the Rainier School. Maybe not, we don't know. I don't know what the contracts say. They're not in front of me right now. We have leases out there. Nobody knows what this is gonna look like if they actually close it, and then we have all this state property out there. So all to say, I'm against putting a knee on the neck of businesses. Period. I can't do it. When I ran in 2017, it was one of the things was to do all we can as a city to help businesses come here and thrive. And that's the way it's gonna have to be.
I do like the breakdown for houses though. Like I like the way that she explained the bands and why it was broken apart that way. So I like how it's, yeah, I like that part. Yep.
How do we feel shifting to just single family and multifamily, so all residential? And we'll leave the fire off for now, the conversation, until after we have additional conversations about the future of the fire department. How do we feel about the pricing for park impact fees? Do we still think it's too high? Since her slide is gone, as a reminder, our current for a single family residence would be $1,624.70. Cut that in half for an ADU. And then for a multifamily unit, it is $1,331, just for today's comparisons. So when you compare that today, to Councilmember Arsano's point, depending on the size of the unit, it is a significant increase. So a couple of ways, if we're looking to further decrease from this proposal, would be to change our expected proportionate share, or if you look at slide 15, remove some of the projects that are listed in order to try to get that fee down. Initial thoughts on the fees?
But again, I mean, I don't want us to out fee ourselves, but we have to be looking in the long term for what we need and what we want to do in the city for the population. And as our population grows, we need those things. So we're gonna have more people that will be using the parks. And this will be basically our only chance to get it is with the impact fees for residential. So the developer will probably pass it on to the consumer, which if people want to live here, then they're going to be living here and using our parks. So I think it's fair.
I agree.
Anything else?
If we remove the industrial and commercial, that will either change the totals for the housing or the totals for our proportionate share. So we'll run a scenario of that both ways to say this will increase the proportionate share for the cities, or this is what the revised housing unit fees would look like, just removing commercial and industrial and keeping the 20% proportional share.
And that may be that we just push out the timeline for a few of those projects, so that we're still meeting them in the long run.
Like the splash pad, I do think that there's several of these that are
Right.
unrealistic in the next 10, 15 years that we could strike and focus on just the.
And we
couple
talked
that-
about pushing out, and we're not sure exactly in how it's coming out, right? These ones.
Okay, so in May, we will bring back some conversation on funding for the fire department in the future with the fire department, and then those two scenarios of park impact fees.
I like to see the historical breakdown, say within the last 10 years. The changes that have happened with, you know, having one, you know, chief, Predmore. And it wasn't until they hired now Chief Scogan as the assistant fire chief that there was a second full-time. And then the funded safer grant person.
Sure, so just the changes of the fire department budget over the last,
Changes,
what's,
let's go
be a fair
10 years.
10 years, okay.
And then the revenue from the MOUs with Wilkeson, Carbonado, Crystal Mountain, the state, where we're getting the EMS levy. Because this is the way we've been funding it all along before, since this advent today of the fire fee, the impact fees. So to see the roadmap, like, thank
Absolutely.
you for asking for that, because that makes perfect sense.
Well, like a project, I mean, is there a way to project like how many
Mhm.
full-time firefighters we're gonna need and what the cost is in a year or two versus now?
Mhm.
Because so when we were sold the fire department, we were told they wouldn't unionize, which we all knew they would within. We thought a year or two, they unionized within a month. So now we have this, we've incurred that cost, right? Well, now there's rules that come with being unionized, right? It's so many per shift and they can start all this stuff. So that's gonna impact on how many people we have. And as you become a volunteer fire department, right, you can't have these people doing your job. There's gonna be a law that coming up that we're gonna have to fight. And all of a sudden, we could have to put on 2 firefighters immediately. And how do we fund it?
Yep.
Without going to our $5 million reserve, right? That's about the only place we can get that type of money to fund our.
Yeah, impact fees wouldn't be able to.
No, they wouldn't be able to say it. So it's a Band-Aid. I get that,
Yeah.
but it's a Band-Aid for one-time money.
Mhm.
That's all I'm curious. It's not, I'm not against it. And it's not, I'm saying no, I want to see more of like a bigger picture. I don't feel like I could do my job as a council member, just saying yes on the impact fees, we're in charge of this, without seeing a little more information as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Exactly.
Any other questions or information that you'd like? Besides the roadmap and future projections in terms of conversations with the fire, that May council meeting, we should also have the union contract that we'll be able to reference for IAFF. Anything else that would be helpful for that conversation or questions that you have?
I think it'll be for me.
Yeah, I think the whole thing, this whole fire impact fee thing is brand new, and I think what Councilmember Arsenault asked for and what I added about what we want to see, and anybody else want to
Call
see
volume.
anything.
Any of that information?
Call volume would be great, and Chief Scogan has kept us up on that,
Yep.
and
Does a really good job with that.
not a real, you know, not real, just something to show what,
Okay.
you know, based on population when that same time, 10 years.
I see the park impact fees for residential only for the fact that we can't, when I say we, the city, throughout the years, we've never really raised any rates or did anything, so everything just sat stagnant. So it does seem like a shell shock to raise it to 2,800, but it's really, you know, probably within a few $100 of where it should be, I'd imagine. For today's, for our growth and everything.
And those are the people that live here that are going to the park.
Yeah.
Right? The people that live here and their kids go to the skate park, they live here and they're using our park. Or the Heritage Park or whatever.
So looking at slide, 17 on page 9, all the way up to the 3750 being at 4,352. Generally, that makes sense.
Well, sorry, one more time.
Greater than 3,750 square feet, the primary housing unit would have an impact fee of 4,352. Okay.
Yeah, I like her breakdown on this one better.
So this makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
last.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. We'll focus on fire.
Anybody have anything else not related to this? Or if you still have things related to this?
Mine's not related.
So nothing else related? Okay, Councilmember Burbank.
I had a citizen, but it's also somebody I work with, that brought up to me today, and I don't know if there's been more issues, but she recently got T-boned on Main Street, at the flashing stoplight by Scoop.
Okay.
And she was driving on Main and got completely T-boned there one time. And then just today, like almost got hit again on Main Street with somebody coming like across. And so I just told her I'd bring it up. I don't know. I know there's the sign that says like cross traffic doesn't stop. But I don't know if there's been other people noticing anything about that there. And I had mentioned to her that the one thing that I noticed, because I drive that way to work too, when I go to Glacier, it's in the morning, it's early, but sometimes it's hard to see if there's cars parked where the salon is on the corner, like it's hard, you have to like creep out a little bit to make sure that there's no cars coming, but I don't know what more could be done, especially since it's flashing and it says cross traffic does not stop. But I mean, that's happened to her now twice. One, her car got totaled and then it was like, she almost got hit again and she's on Main Street. So I don't know if other people have, I told her I'd bring it up. I don't know.
There's been multiple.
Has there? Okay,
Yeah.
see, so
And
I-
so we need to run accident data. Part of the city hall remodel includes painting the curbs so that it will restrict parking on that side of the street.
okay,
We've also discussed doing it on the other side of the street, but I'm not sure that it's been done yet.
okay.
So that's one thing that we can do is paint additional so that people are guided to not park there and then enforce parking if they do park there anyways. Right now, we have very limited parking enforcement. The other option is prior to my time at the city, I know that we did research a four-way stop, and at that time, it didn't seem that we met the qualifications, but things may have changed
I mean,
in the last couple of years in terms of incidents. Yeah, and
Yeah.
lights are very expensive, but it is not a four-way stop, and it might qualify for one now.
Okay.
So that's something that I can discuss with the city engineer and look into.
Okay.
Right when I first got on council, I had the same thing, a complaint I brought up at a council meeting, Dom addressed it, and it was due to they said if they put a four-way stop there it would back up to it would mess up the school traffic. He had a reason why anyways, because
Okay.
we had researched it back then, so because that guy had gotten, it was the same thing, he'd been in like one or two accidents on Main Street.
Well, and the speed limit's
know.
only 25 miles, and when she was like, she was pretty upset when she came up, like, oh my gosh, twice in like less than three, like, I don't know.
People pull out in front of my husband almost daily there.
Mhm.
Because he's, driving around in his little truck and his little truck doesn't stop on a dime. So, he has to.
He gets that hit, you're not gonna get it fixed.
We'll look into it.
Okay, thank you for checking.
Anything else? Questions, comments?
No, it's a good study session.
All right, so with that, it is 7:26 PM. Oh, still the first of April 2025. This concludes the Buckley City Council study session.